My books, The Origin of Names, Words, and Everything in Between, volumes 1 and 2, are available to purchase from most major booksellers in all major formats. Order your copies today so you can enjoy these books for yourself and help support the channel. With a combined total of just over 1.4 billion native and non-native speakers, English is the most widely spoken language on our planet. It has official or de facto status in at least one country in every habited continent on our planet. This means speakers of the language can be found in the depths of Africa, across the Indian subcontinent, in all 50 states of the USA and even north of the border, literally everyone in the Netherlands, and even many of the research bases in Antarctica speak English too. Put plainly, English is everywhere. English has been dubbed the world/global language and is also seen as the lingua franca, which means the common language spoken amongst people of different languages in a certain field. For example, English is seen as the lingua franca of international businesses, meaning if a business has set up shop in places as far apart as Sweden, Sudan, and El Salvador, they will use English to communicate with one another. So when you take a moment to actually think about how universal the language of English is and where speakers of it can be found, it's a little weird that this near global language is simply named after a tiny portion of a tiny island just off the coast of mainland Europe. If by any chance you weren't aware, the English language is named after the country of England, which is one of the 4 smaller countries that make up the larger nation of the United Kingdom. Yeah, it's a whole thing that I and many of us have explained in the past, though I guess the language isn't really named after the country. More specifically, the language and the country are named after the native inhabitants of the English, who get their name for a corruption of the Angles, a Germanic group who settled in the land and brought their language with them at least like 12 years ago or something. Naming languages after their native speakers/nations they originated from isn't a particularly novel thing for English. In fact, most languages are named in this fashion. Languages like German, Japanese, and Polish are all named like this. There are some exceptions, of course, with languages like Hindi, Mandarin, and Hebrew coming from different roots. The system of naming languages after where they originated from works in most cases, as the majority of languages are primarily spoken just where they come from, so these names make sense. But certain languages have spread all across the globe, but their names still reference the places they originated from. Honestly, this video could be about many other languages that have been exported around the world, like Spanish or French, but I feel the most obvious is English. Plus, I feel way more comfortable poking holes in my own language/people/country, as opposed to poking holes at other languages. To highlight how strange it is that English is still called English, the United Kingdom, which as mentioned is home to England, has only the 6th highest population of English speakers out of every country in the world. The Philippines, Nigeria, Pakistan, India, and the USA all have more English speakers than England itself. Though regardless of this fact, the language still holds onto that name of English wherever you find it on the globe. That name that references the tiny island it derived from. So how exactly did English become so universal? Well, explained very briefly, after the Romans left Britain, the island was left speaking a variety of Celtic dialects, as well as Latin left by the Romans. Then in the 5th century, 3 Germanic tribes called the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes decided to conquer the island. These tribes primarily kept themselves to the land we now call England, while the native Celtic speakers were driven to further outposts of the island, as well as going over to Ireland itself. This is why places like Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man, which yes I know isn't part of the UK but shush, and even Cornwall have stronger Celtic identities to this day than England. The Germanic languages these 3 tribes spoke merged into the Anglo-Saxon language, sorry Jutes, you don't get a reference in this name, and then evolved into Old English, then Middle English, and then Modern English as we know it today. Of course, the French invasion of 1066 played a larger role in giving the language a French influence too. While that explains how the language formed on the island, the reason it spread so far and wide was due to the British Empire, which kicked off in the 16th century. This empire would go on to colonize around 1/4 of the globe, bringing their language of English with them. Of all the British Empire's claims, the land that would go on to spread English the most was of course the USA. When the English claimed part of what would go on to be the USA, they brought the language of English with them. And then when the USA gained independence, they kept English as their primary language, though not official as we've mentioned before. The USA has gone on to become one of the world's most powerful countries, shaping so much of the modern world. What's interesting is that the USA isn't just powerful powerful politically, but culturally too. American-made media like books, films, and music, primarily made in English, is enjoyed across the globe, allowing millions of people to take in the language. British-made media, created in English too, is also pretty darn popular across the world too. It can't be understated how much American and British-made media, which is created in English, has helped spread the language around the world, though a more recent creation has helped English become dominant too, that being the internet. The internet as we know it today is an English language invention, meaning that English is the primary language online, and as the World Wide Web is, well, worldwide, it means English is spread throughout the world through its tubes too. As English is spread across the globe, some have begun to feel that the name of English for this language has become a little outdated. As mentioned, it seems kind of strange for a language so widely spoken to be named after just one tiny place. There has been talk of English receiving a new name, and I need to stress that is all this is. Talk. There's been no actual motion or laws or anything like that put in place demanding that English receive a new name. And conversely, this video isn't me pitching why I think it should have a new name, it's just a fun idea I wanted to share with you all and thought it might be something you enjoy thinking about. Ideas as to why people think English should get a new name include the evolution of the language. As English has changed so much in the places it is spoken, some feel that the idea of calling it simply English is a little bit inaccurate. Another idea is that calling the language English is somewhat culturally insensitive and not all that inclusive. Calling it English is seen by some as implying a sense of ownership of the language to England/the UK. Likewise, it could be seen as England having dominance over other English-speaking places, where as mentioned, it's only the 6th most popular English-speaking nation. Though of course, there is a very valid case for English to not receive a new name. This includes the historical significance of that name and how globally recognized that name already is. Plus, the actual changing of the name could prove to not be that practical or feasible. It would also open up the debate on other language names like Spanish and French and Portuguese. Do they need new names too? Suffice to say, the pros and cons are equally valid in this argument, but let's say, hypothetically, somehow it's decided that English should in fact receive a new name, one that distances itself from England and incorporates how commonly spoken it is. What on earth could that new name even be? Well, across the web there have been suggestions, some I like a tad more than others. Ones I don't particularly agree with are names that relate to other nations where English is more popular, like the idea of calling the language American. I don't dislike this name out of some weird patriotism for England, but simply because it references a specific place, which is what we are trying to avoid with a new name. Other ideas are names that refer to the global reach of the language, with name ideas being the likes of calling English Earthling, or Terran, or even Gaia. I personally feel there's still some issues with these names. While they reference the global nature of English, I feel they're almost a little too global. They almost imply that English is the only language on Earth, as opposed to being just the most common. I personally feel that any new name for the language shouldn't imply it's the only one spoken. Weirdly enough, when thinking about this idea, I immediately went to the worlds of fantasy and science fiction. Many fantasy and sci-fi worlds include the concept of a universal language, which has a name that doesn't reference a location. Examples include the language of Westron in Middle-earth, the common tongue of Westeros, and the common speech of the Northern Kingdoms of the Witcher series. These are languages that the characters of these stories are talking to one another in most of the time. They're interesting examples of what a common language could be called, but not perfect for our sake. Tolkien's Westron still implies a location, and the other two use the word common, which while fitting is still an English language word. In regards to sci-fi, we have the common language of Star Wars, Galactic Basic Standard, a very to the point name, but it doesn't really help our cause. Another idea is that English simply doesn't get a single name. English has evolved so much in the places it is spoken that many don't see it as a single language. Each version of English could have its own name, like American English or Nigerian English. These terms do actually already exist, but aren't really used on a day-to-day basis, and they kind of go against our mission of finding one universal name for the language. Finally, on my quest to find a new name for English, I kind of turned to the dark side. I asked ChatGPT, Now, I'm not the biggest fan of these kinds of AIs. I made a whole video on the matter, but curiosity got the better of me this one instance. Also, it's somewhat unlikely that ChatGPT made up these names all on its own. It most likely sourced these ideas and names from deep pockets of the internet I wasn't able to find. So if you originally created one of these names that ChatGPT suggested, then thank you and apologies. The first idea ChatGPT came up with was the name of Angloverse, saying that this name captures the language's historical roots in the Anglo-Saxon and British cultures, but also acknowledging its global reach and influence across various countries and continents. I find this one kind of fitting, I guess, but it still has the issue of referencing the Angles with the term of Anglo, so I went on to ask for some more suggestions. These included Anglomorph, Lingua Terra, Globespeak, Versalingua, Universal, and just Crossword as some weird joke. All these names, in my opinion, have pros and cons. Many of them either fall into the trap of referencing England/Anglos or mention universalness, which seemingly neglects other languages. Maybe I'm just being too picky or something. Though, maybe we don't need a whole new name. Maybe there's actually been a valid name we can use all along. As mentioned, English is often referred to as the lingua franca, which means it is used across different communities. How about instead of saying that English is a lingua franca, we just call English lingua franca instead? This is a term that has been used throughout history for other languages too, like Greek and Latin. Conversely, many believe that Mandarin might become the lingua franca at some point in the future. Maybe lingua franca could be a floating name of sorts, a title passed from language to language when their time comes to be the speech of the world. We could call English lingua franca for now, and then if another language overtakes it, that could be called lingua franca, and English could just go back to being called English. This is just my own idea, and one I haven't completely thought through. I'm sure there are holes in this idea which I'm willing to hear. I don't even fully agree with it myself, but like I said, it's a fun idea. So, does English need a new name? Well, it's not a simple yes or no answer. This video wasn't really made to give you one either. There are pros and cons to the whole idea, and then what name could replace it opens up an entire can of worms unto itself. Honestly, in my own opinion, I can't imagine English getting a new name anytime soon. But let me know what you think. This whole video was created to get you all thinking and having a respectable discussion about it down in the comments, like I know you all can do. So, should English change its name? And if so, then what on earth should it be? Name Explained depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explained videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/NameExplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.